What kind of things were happening here to you after that?
I was getting inspected by everybody: health, fisheries, Ministry of Natural Resources, electrical safety. It was a constant. I remember a call from the fire chief says, "What is going on down there?" He said, "This is our 4th time down there and we can't even find hardly a lit cigarette."
Each time that we were called to the scene, a thorough investigation was undertaken by the responding officers.
Inspector Bill Snodden heads the OPP's Bracebridge detachment. How many incidents have the OPP investigated on the High Falls property?
Approximately about 65.
65. Is that kind of high for, you know, a little small area like this, 65?
I would say yes, it's fairly high.
On some days, the OPP visited High Falls 2 or 3 times, and many of the complaints got more and more outrageous, like the time Johnston accused Coldin of virtually holding her hostage.
At one point, Mr. Coldin had put a gate up, knowing my father was in the hospital dying, put a gate up and padlocked it. For 5 days, I tried to get the town, the police, somebody to get the padlocks off so I could see my dad.
The story made the local paper, complete with a photo of Johnston supposedly kneeling by a locked gate. But a statement from police said Lynn Johnston's access was never blocked. The OPP kept arresting Coldin anyway, like the night he allegedly rode his ATV through the neighbor's property.
And I said to the officer, I said, "Are you going to go down and look for tracks?" He says, "I'm not wasting my time looking for tracks."
It's called evidence.
No, but what his reply was, he says, "You two want to fight?" He says, "I've had enough of this, you're going to jail."
And when there was evidence of possible misconduct on the part of his neighbors, what did police do? Well, electrician Keith Martin watched an incident involving Marty Bosfeld.
He come up in a Mercedes and he flung open this gate, just spun his tires out for about 20-30 feet across the main parking lot here. And such doing that, one of the stones flew up, hit a little kid in the face.
Did the OPP ever come to you and say, "Hey, tell us about that, you were a witness"?
No, I guess they felt that I was part of the High Falls clan, as where I'm not.
How many times were you taken to jail?
There's been so often. There's been the local jail I've been taken to lots of times. I've been in Penetang at a minimally 3 times, maybe 4 times, at 3 or 4 nights per stay.
I understand it's difficult, but what was it like for you to be handcuffed and thrown into jail?
You lose your power, like you lose your freedom. Some of the times I was arrested in front of my kids. That's worse than going to jail.
By the summer of 2003, Brian Coldin's life was a living hell. His neighbors had vowed to drive him out of High Falls Resort. He was facing half a dozen criminal charges, and his legal bills were mounting. But the worst was yet to come.
This is not my bag. Where do I sit?
Labor Day, and Marty Bosfeld rode his motorcycle up to the playground area.
Ran me down, cut my knuckle open. I ended up in a heap on the ground. 5 witnesses. The person driving the bike did not deny running me down, and there was no charges laid. Well, the next morning, I guess he got all puffed up and figured the police are definitely on his side or not on my side, because...
He came back after you?
The next day, he came after me again and hit me head on my ATV. I get charged. Okay?
You get you're hit by a motorcycle twice and you're charged?
I'm charged.
With what?
Assault with a deadly weapon or dangerous weapon.
And what was this dangerous weapon?
My ATV.
After yet another weekend in a Penetang prison cell, Brian Coldin was transferred to Bracebridge Jail. His lawyer went to court seeking bail with the usual conditions. But this time, the Crown was playing hardball and refused to agree to Coldin's release unless he agreed to get out of town. So on that day, the Justice of the Peace ordered Coldin to stay away from his home and his business in High Falls, to stay away from the town of Bracebridge and the entire district of Muskoka, and even the city of London, Ontario, where one of his aggrieved neighbors lived. It's the kind of order that is usually reserved for convicted pedophiles and violent murderers.
Had I been there at the time, I would have put on the record, Your Worship, this is unheard of. What in the world are we talking about here?
Lorne Honickman is a Toronto criminal lawyer. He took Brian Coldins' case after he had been ordered to get out of Muskoka.
By the time Brian Coldin was facing those charges where he got out on bail, the police and the Crown were well aware of this huge, huge vendetta that was taking place. They knew about the animosity.
Animosity that Honickman says the court encouraged with that get-out-of-town order, issued by Justice of the Peace Susan Robillard. When we asked about Robillard's background and qualifications for the job, Ontario's Attorney General declined to provide any information. What we did find out is that prior to her appointment, she worked as an administrative assistant to a judge. This judge, John Evans, who is now her common law partner. Robillard's order gave Coldins' enemies a new weapon. Before long, they made sure all of Muskoka knew he was a pariah. A notice appeared on a board outside the Muskoka Tourism Office, proclaiming Brian Coldin a menace whom the courts had ordered out of town. What thoughts ran through your mind when, I mean, you're like a wanted guy on a wanted poster.
They put that in Muskoka Tourism, Bracebridge Chamber. They hand-delivered it up and down the street.
But what thoughts went through your mind when you saw this thing?
I couldn't believe it. I called the police, and the police said there's nothing they can do about it.
Facing 14 criminal charges, his business in decline, Brian Coldin was desperate to keep his resort going, even happy to rent to a convention of nudists. Well, that was enough to get the poster brigade going again. This time with a warning about a 7-foot boa constrictor on the loose at High Falls.
They were in all the banking machines, they were in stores, they were in bulletin boards, Max Milk, the convenience stores, hydro poles, mailboxes, the post office, front doors. They were everywhere.
Anita Ramsey called local reporter Matthew Sittler looking for a little ink.
She said she put up about 20 of the posters around Bracebridge that weekend. And when I phoned the police, they said they were treating the whole thing as a practical joke.
Dangerous driving took 2 hours, and they would ignore eyewitnesses. Snake. There's a snake loose at a resort, and it's obvious. Why is it put up? It's put up to do damage to Brian Coldin. It contains false information, including the fact that the OPP were sanctioning it. We're investigating, we're investigating, we're investigating, we're investigating, we're investigating, we're investigating, we're investigating. 6 weeks later, no charges.
Inspector Bill Snodden of the OPP. Is this public mischief?
In order to substantiate public mischief in relation to this, you have to prove that the people putting the poster up knew that the allegation was untrue. I did not know that to be the case. When I spoke to Ms. Ramsey and Ms. Johnson, at the time, they were quite adamant that they believed that this snake was on the loose and that they were issuing this warning as a public service.
In Coldin's eyes, the OPP's refusal to prosecute the snake charges is another example of the justice system refusing to recognize his neighbor's deep hostility. Hostility that seemed clear when Marty Bosfeld spewed venom during a phone conversation with W5.
Brian Coldin is a dangerous person. He is going to kill somebody, and I'll put that on record.